This is the second video in the Using the Concord Suite series. This video is Concord Forms Designer, modifying a form created in the Easy Form Wizard. The next video in the series is Concord Forms Designer, creating a scan template to scan your forms in the Remark Office OMR software. So before we get started, I like to mention where the documentation for the Concord Forms Designer is stored. And if you start the Concord software and click on Help and Concord Documentation, the next window that will come up will first of all tell you where the documentation is stored, and it's on your computer, the C drive, then the Program Files folder, then subfolders Data Blocks, Concord 7.0, and Documentation. And you'll see a System Requirements file, a couple of quick guides for using the Concord Suite, and then the Concord User's Manual here. And if I double click there, the manual will pop up in a PDF reader. On the left side you have bookmarks that you can click on and move down into the manual for specific subjects. So any of these bookmarks will take you to a specific subject, and I'll let you peruse that documentation on your own. So we'll close this and close this and go back to our Concord Forms Designer. So we've created this form in the first video using the Easy Form Design Wizard, and let's talk about what we have here. A Concord form is made up of a number of different objects or fields. Text objects like these two here at the top, graphics objects, bubble objects, box objects, there are line objects, there are shade objects. So these are just pieces of your form, and you use the drawing tools to draw those. Of course, all of these fields and objects have been drawn for you, so we will talk about how to create new fields in a few minutes, but let's talk about the fields that are here, how to modify them and change them. The first thing let's talk about is how to move a field, and the way you do that is if you put your cursor over any field. This happens to be a piece of text, a title field, and I click on it, you'll see that these black field markers or handles appear. When you see those markers, you know you've got a field selected, and if I put my cursor over that field, I get a 4-point move cursor. And if I left click, press the left mouse button and drag it, it will move that field, and I can move it as many times as I want into whatever position I prefer to move it to. Okay, works the same with any field. Okay, just click on the field and select it, and then left click and drag it to the new location. Okay, so if you wanted these titles to be moved down just a little bit, you didn't like the placement that the Easy Form Design Wizard made, you could drag them down a little bit. Now, one caveat I should mention about the Easy Form Design Wizard, and to unselect all fields, you can click off in the white space somewhere, and all fields will become unselected, and you'll notice that the object bar changed back to the regular object bar. On this regular object bar is the Back to Easy Form button, and we can go back into the Easy Form Design Wizard as many times as we want, and we can modify fields and change them. And if that's all you ever need to do, then this video isn't even something you need to look at. But be aware that once you modify fields out here, change the color, move them around, do anything to them, and go back into the wizard, all the changes you made will be erased. The wizard does not have the ability to keep up with changes that you make outside of it, the wizard. And the reason for that is that the wizard regenerates the form from scratch every time you exit the wizard. Okay, so just be aware of that one situation. So the idea is that you should really finish using the wizard before you start making hand changes in the full Forms Designer, which is what this video is all about. Okay, so that's how you select single fields. That's how you move single fields. If I want to select more than one field, I can left click on the top above and left of the field, or above and right of the field, click the left mouse button and start to drag, and you'll see that it drags a dotted box. Anything that touches this dotted box will be selected. So instead here now, having one field selected, I have two fields selected, and when I move them, it moves both fields. Okay, so that is a way. That's one way to select things. The other way to select multiple objects, and once again I'm going to click off here in the white space so that nothing is selected, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key, click on the first title, and then click on the second title. That's another way to select fields, multiply select fields. So you can either, I'm going to click off in the white space again, you can either left click and drag a box over the fields, click off in the white space again, or you can hold down the Shift key and select multiple fields, and I can even select this field over here. So now I have all three, and when I start to move it, one of these fields, all three of them move. Okay, so those are the two ways that you select fields, and it's a very handy thing to know. Okay, so now that we've shown how to move fields, let's show how to modify existing fields on the form. Okay, I'm going to click off in the white space again. Notice this object bar keeps changing. Okay, the object bar, if nothing is selected on the form, it shows the form properties as a whole. This is the form. The paper size, we have portrait and landscape. These are the density of the bubbles that we can put on the form, and there's usually some extra buttons. But if I select a particular object, that whole object bar changes. Okay, first off though, let's talk about how to change the properties. If I double click on a field, it pops up the field properties for that field. And I'm going to move this just a little bit to the right by left clicking and dragging on the title bar. These are all the properties for this piece of text. This is the field name, which is Title 1. The color is blue, the font is Arial, the point size is 20. We've got some other font details. Then we've got where the field is horizontal, vertical, text alignment, and the text itself. Okay, so I can change anything here. If I wanted to change, say, the color, for some reason I wanted it to stand out a little more, I wanted it to be black, and let's just say I wanted to make it bold. Okay, I can change those properties, and when I click OK down here, the screen reflects the changes that I made. But this field is still selected. You can tell that once again because of the black handles around it. But notice also up here in the object bar, this object bar has changed dramatically from the regular one, and these are the same properties we just saw in the properties dialog box. And I'm going to click over here because I can get back to that properties dialog box either by double clicking on the field or clicking on properties. And when I look, I'm going to move this down a little bit, and you can see these are exactly the same properties represented here, only in shorthand up here on the object bar. The object bar is a way you can modify the properties very quickly without having to go in and out of the field properties dialog box. It's just a shorthand way to change things. So if you're not comfortable, don't understand what these properties are, and this is a bit cryptic, then you can come in here and the software will give you some very nice labeled field properties. Okay? So I'm going to click OK here, but let's say I wanted to change this back to blue. I can go up here and just select blue, and it changes it back. Or if I wanted to unbold it, I can click the bold button, and it will unbold it. Okay. Some of these properties should look familiar. Some of them may not be quite so familiar. Okay, and you can always use these properties to see what they do. You can click on each of the buttons on a field to see what they do. With this video, we're not going to go into all the details about each and every property for each and every field. I do want to mention one thing here. This is a text field, and that's what we've been concentrating on so far. And here in this entry box, or on the properties dialog box, this is where you enter the text. If you want to change something, let's say I want to just add spring 2000, whoops, not spring, spring 2013. I can change the text here, and it will add that text. When I click OK down here, it will add that text. Okay. There is another kind of text object. Whenever I change any of the properties here, blue, I change the color, the font, it reflects the entire piece of text. Down here, the Easy Form Design Wizard created this text box with our group of instructions in it. In a text box, there's a couple things about a text box that are great. Number one, you can type into it. So if I want to change the text, I type it into the box. Okay, so that's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do with the text box, by the way, this feature is very common amongst Windows software. You'll see it in Word and other software. But the other thing I can do is if I wanted to highlight something, maybe I wanted to turn those characters red, I can do that. I can select parts of a text box and change it, and it will, when I click off, reflect that color. Okay. You can also change the size of a text box. Notice that the handles or field markers are around this box. I can change the size of the box anytime I want to. Make it a little smaller, make it a little bigger, do whatever I want with the box. A lot of people ask why aren't all text fields text boxes. You really shouldn't overuse this feature. It really is for doing paragraphs of text like this. When you have a text object that all the properties of that object are going to be the same, and that includes titles, questions, labels for your bubbles, things like that. You really should use the regular text object. It works. Works a little bit easier to use and works a little bit better than a text box. Okay, so that's the difference between this text object down here and these regular text objects up here. Okay. And I'm just going to move this over here and center it just a little bit. Okay, so the next thing we need to talk about are linked fields. Okay, a lot of times when you click on a single object, you'll get just that object. But sometimes, and I'm going to click over here on the ID number, when you click on a group like this, no matter where you click in here, even though you can tell there's a big box, there's little boxes, there's shading, there's bubbles, there's text, no matter where you click, you don't get that object selected, you get just the whole object selected. The reason for that is that this is a linked object. Okay, a lot of the things that are created by the Easy Form Design Wizard are linked together, and linking is just a grouping function. It's very similar to the function in Word and other software where you take a number of smaller objects and you turn them into a solid group. Now, when something is linked, I can put my cursor over the link, and you can see once again I get my 4-point move cursor, and I can left click and I can drag it to a new position. I can't change anything in the link, but I can certainly drag it to a new position. Okay, the reason you can't change anything in the link is very much on purpose. The idea is that you can link a group together so that it shouldn't be changed, can't be changed accidentally, and if you want to change it, of course, there's a way to unlink it, change it, and then relink it, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. Notice that when I select a link like this, or the date is also linked over here, up here the object bar changes again, and there's some new buttons here. One called Link Properties and one called Unlink Selected Fields. So if I want to modify this, I can unlink the fields, and let's say I just wanted to make the date instead of 50% blue, which is what the wizard did for us, I make it dark blue. So that's changed. I can then relink, and I can relink by selecting all the fields in the link again, and I'm going to do that. Left click, drag this box over everything. It's selected all the fields, and you can see that because they all have handles. Some of them are gray, one of them is black, but they all have field markers or handles, and you can see there's a bunch of things selected in here. And notice that this button up here, Link Selected Fields, appeared. So I can tell I don't have a link selected because there's no unlink button, but I can click that button and it relinks the field. Okay, these two unlink selected fields and link selected fields buttons are also in the format menu. Link selected fields, unlink selected fields. So they're in two places. Okay, so that is what linking is for. There is another reason for linking, a much more important reason, and I'm going to talk about that down here with our demographic multiple choice question and our Likert style questions. Another thing about linking is that when you're linking in bubble fields, especially blank bubbles, you're often linking in the question text and the labels. We call this label text because it's labeling the bubbles as to what they mean. If you link the question text and the labels in with the bubble fields, it number one links this into a single question. There's 4 bubble fields here, and there's 8 labels, and there's 1 question text. It links it into a solid group, but it also links it into 1 solid question, and it also links the question text and the labels so that they will be carried into the scan template file that we'll create in a different video, and those can then be carried over to the report generator, so you don't have to retype those in the report generator. So that's a much more important reason to link things. And I'm going to unlink this just so you can see that what we have are 4 separate bubble fields, and we have a question text, 8 labels, and when we link those together, when you link bubble fields together where there are labels and question text, you'll get something else that will happen. The link properties box will pop up. The reason this happens is for you to check and make sure that everything looks okay. Make sure that the labels are in the correct order: magenta, Concord, red, blue, so forth. What your favorite color is down here in the question text, and just check to make sure that everything looks the way it's supposed to. I'm scrolling down in the labels, and if it doesn't, then you can unlink it and relink it. You can confuse the linker, and we'll talk about that in just 1 second, by linking in extraneous fields. But this looks good to me, so I'm going to click OK. So we're good to go on this link. Now down here, this is a group of Likert style questions. Okay, Likert style questions mean questions where you have a number of questions with the same answers. In this case, we have a 5-point Likert scale: strongly agree to strongly disagree. All these questions have the same answers. So what we're going to do is unlink this and click on the unlink button, and so you can see that the labels are selected. They're part of this link. The bubble field is selected, and notice that many groups, all 7 questions have only 1 single bubble field. And then these shading fields are selected. All of the numbers are selected. The text is selected. But notice one thing that's not selected. Please rate each of the following. The reason this is not in the link is because it's what we call extra or extraneous text. It's not actually part of the field that describes the questions or the labels. When you link Likert style questions, the linking module is trying to match the number of labels you have to the number of columns of bubbles you have. It's also trying to match the number of questions you have over here, in this case we have 7, to the number of rows that we have here. If those don't match, the linker module gets confused, and here's what happens, and there are indications of that. I'm going to select, when you have a number of fields already selected, if you hold down the shift key and click on another field, it will select that field. Okay, so I'm going to select that field, and I'm going to link it, and we're going to get some errors here. First of all, we get an error message. That says there will be some text in the extra text at the bottom of the link properties dialog box. This is usually an indicator that link did not work correctly. So I'm going to click OK, and we're going to see what happened. Okay, anytime you see something in the extra text after you've linked, there's a problem, and that's what that error was indicating. You can see there's a problem. Our labels should be here. We should have strongly agree, agree, neutral, and so forth. Our questions should be here. Nothing should be here. And what we've got is it stuck please rate each of the following, which isn't really a question or a label. It put that with the labels because the position of that piece of text, it doesn't know whether it's a question or a label, so it really messes up the link. So that's the purpose of it, of the software popping up the link properties window. So if I click to fix this, I can cancel, or if you press OK there, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't hurt anything. And then I would unlink this, and the same way I selected this piece of text, I can unselect it. Hold down the shift key and click on it, and we'll unselect that piece of text and leave just the things I want to link. One thing to notice is that the software, if they're exactly two pieces of text for each row, it will assume that the first one is a number and the second one is the actual text. So that works in a link, okay, in case you're confused by that. But now when I link this, we pop up the link properties window and you can see the labels are in the correct place, values are in the correct place, all the questions look good through 7, and there's nothing in extra text and we got no error. Okay, so that's a little about linking and unlinking and why certain things happen. The linking module is trying to do some work for you here, and when things are extraneously linked in. Now notice here that it looks like, because we only have these one set of field markers, it looks like this is part of it, but if I can tell when I click on it, it's not, because when I click on it, the field markers just go around that one object or field. Okay, so a little bit about linking, and now, so once again, to modify any linked field, you can unlink it, make any modification you want. Let's say for some reason I decided black was not the color I wanted it to be here. I want it to be what's another color? Cyan. Okay, it's a popular computer color. And I can make that change. I just typed in the new word there. I selected that field, typed in the new word. Now I can left click, grab all of these things again, and make sure they're selected, make sure there are field markers around all of the objects I want to link, and then link them back. Okay, it pops up. Everything looks good here. Pops up the link properties window, click OK. So that's how you modify fields that are on the form already. And once again, links you can move as well. If I want this to be moved in just a little bit, I can do that. I'm just going to move it back. So that's how you modify fields. We've talked about now how you move fields and how you move links and how you modify single fields and how you modify links. So let's talk about something else here. Let's talk about how to add new fields. Okay, adding new fields to a form is a simple process of clicking, and I'm going to do it out here off the page just for illustration. And that's what this area is for off the page. This line marks the edge of the page, or more accurately, the edge of the printable area. And out here is workspace. So you can work out here and then move things on your form, or you can move things off the form, do a little work in an area, and then move things back on the form. So that's what all this extra workspace is for. So we're just going to use it for illustration. And the way you create any new object is to click on the proper tool, and the tools are here on the menu: Form ID, responses or bubbles, text, lines, boxes, shade, and graphics. Okay, we'll talk about image regions here in just a minute. But you select one of these tools. Let's do something simple. I want to create a new line. And when I do that, notice the object bar changes and becomes the properties for that new object I'm about to put on the form. And then the toolbar changes a little bit. It shows me the tool that I've selected, and I could select it here, but we selected it on the menu. And then you move your cursor onto the workspace. Notice that the cursor has changed again to give you an indicator of what you're about to do. The crosshair indicates you're ready to draw a new object. The way you do that, the way you draw any object in Concord, is to left click your mouse button and drag. And when you drag, you'll get a box of some sort, and when I let go, it created a line that long. In certain instances, how far you drag things, like with lines, boxes, shading, will indicate how large the object is. In other cases, it will not. So it's just a left click and a drag. But no matter what object you're putting on the screen or on the workspace, it's a left click and a drag. So we've drawn a line here. We can then modify that line either here on the object bar or going into the properties dialog box. We could change the color of it once again. Let's make a green line just for the heck of it. Let's make it a little thicker. There is a line type, dotted and dashed and solid. I'm just going to leave it solid. When we click OK, we get a line with those changes. Now with the line and boxes and things, you can modify the size by moving out here onto one of the field markers. When you get this 2-point cursor and left click and drag, it will change the size of the object. Okay, with the line, it only changes it in one direction because a line is two-dimensional, or I'm sorry, one-dimensional more or less. And so you can make it bigger or smaller. You can change the size once it's on the form, so you don't have to worry about exactly how big you're drawing it in the first place, because you can always make it fit afterwards. You can also just put your cursor over, left click and drag and move it around just like any other object. So that's a line. A box is very much the same. Left click and drag, and whatever box I draw, that will be the size of my box. And notice that it picked up the properties of the last line or box that I drew. It does that very much on purpose to keep things consistent. But I could, let's say I wanted to make this thinner. Now the one property that's different here is the corner type. I have square corners here, but I can round corners, and I can round just the top corners like this, and it rounds the top corners. I can round all of them, the bottom. This is just for aesthetics, okay? And also remember that the screen resolution, it looks a little jagged here, but the screen resolution is not as good as your printer resolution. So this will be a smooth curve when it's drawn on the screen, I'm sorry, on your printer. So you can, just like with a line, if you want to change the size, if I want to change just in one direction, I can put it on this field marker. If I want to change in two directions, I can put it on this one and get that 2-point cursor. Always look for that 2-point cursor. I can drag it in one direction like this. So you can change the object once it's here. You can also move it. Okay, so that's lines, boxes. Shading is very simple. Just like a box, you can draw it inside here. And that made a gray box, 5% gray, very light. Because most shading, you don't want it to be dark because you want it to be highlighting either text or a bubble field like this over here or something like that. So it's always a left click and a drag, even when I'm putting a new piece of text. So let's click on the text. It's picked up exactly the same as the last piece of text I worked on, which was that cyan field. Let's say I want to change this back to black here and draw that. Once again, left click and drag, and notice that the box that gets created, I'm just going to click OK here. The box I drew had nothing to do with the size of the text. Okay, the size of the text is set by the point size here and whether it's bold, italic, or underlined. So if I change this to 18, you'll see the text down there reflects that change if I want to make it bold. So the box doesn't always reflect the size, but it does for some objects, like the obvious ones for lines, boxes, shading, those kinds of things. Now, a graphic is very simple. You click on the graphic and it shows you the bitmap file that the graphic came out of. The Concord software will only open bitmap graphic type files, but if you have a graphic in another file type, you can open it in something like the Paint program that comes with Windows or some other drawing program, and you can copy and paste it. Magenta will then convert it to a bitmap. But if you click on the graphics tool, you can go look at different graphics. Now, the Concord software actually comes with some helpful little graphics like arrows and things that help you do forms, and they are stored. Once again, if you click over here, you can see they're stored on the C drive under the program files folder, then subfolders data blocks, Magenta 7.0, and then images. So if I wanted to grab another little image here, and you can go look at the ones that are there. Some of these are not here. This is here for illustration, this Google logo. We don't distribute that with our software. But there are some pencil graphics in case you need those, and there's some others here from different forms. The one I want to grab is this black arrow here. When I click open, and it will open that file, and I can draw it, and it's once again a left click and a drag. Now, the only property to a graphic is the field name, which is not very important here, and the name of the bitmap file that it came out of. Now, when the Concord software first draws a graphic, it draws it the size that it's indicated inside the graphic file or the bitmap file. It also draws it in the color. Now, you can't change colors of graphics because that is defined by what's in the graphic. You would have to use a drawing program like as I said before, paint or something like that to modify a graphic. Once it's on the form, though, the one thing you can do to it is you can change the size of it. So if I wanted to make this bigger, I can just stretch it the same way I would a box. I can also make it smaller. I can make it shorter. So you can change the way a graphic looks inside the graphic once it's on the form, and it will stay that size. Okay. So those are the main objects we've talked about: the boxes, lines, shading, text, now graphics. The last one I want to talk about are bubbles, and I'm going to select all of these, and this is something else to know. I've selected all these fields. I want to get rid of them. There is a big red X up here in the toolbar, and if I put my cursor over it, it tells me this is how I delete selected fields. So I'm clicking on that, and everything that I had selected went away. Okay, very handy feature to know. So now let's talk about the bubble fields, because they're a little more complicated than other fields, and then we'll talk about how to change an existing question. Bubble fields, when I click on that, I get the properties for a bubble field, and they look somewhat similar to a text field, but there are a lot of things missing. The colors, the color is selected as a gray 50%. You would never want to make a bubble field a solid color. Okay, there are cases where you do, but mostly you don't. You would never, for instance, make it black. And the reason for that, and I'm just going to go ahead and select a 0 through 9 field. I'm going to make it horizontal. I'm going to leave this is my shape, okay, circles, ovals, or squares. I'm just going to leave it circle normal, and I'm going to draw this field. Left click and a drag, just like everything else. And I'm going to click OK. The reason, it's going to make me name it, because bubble fields are scannable areas, so this is just test. Oops. So if I create a field like this and it's black, the numbers and letters inside the bubbles will be dark, and they can interfere with the scanning of this field. They can become so dark, depending on how your form is printed or copied, they could be interpreted as data. So that's why we have all these different percentages of different colors, so that number one, shading can be lighter, especially when it crosses bubbles, and your bubble fields that have numbers and letters inside them can be lighter. Okay, in Concord, the circles will always be a big black circle, and that's a requirement of the Remark Office scanning program. It needs to see a full circle, but what's inside of it needs to be lightened up to something like gray 50%. Since different printers print at different darknesses, that's why we give you all the different. We start at 50%. If your printer was printing this too dark and you were getting data where nothing was marked, then you might lighten it up to gray 45 or gray 40, reprint the form and retest it. So that's the purpose of the different colors. But let's talk about this bubble field. That was talking about the color. Let's talk about the field. Here, you saw me select 0 through 9. This is a suggested list of what can go in a bubble field, and there's all kinds of things in here, but this is just a suggested list. You can type anything into this box and you'll get bubbles with those letters or numbers in them. But there's some interesting things here. These are the standard bubble fields, very commonly used: 0 through 9, 1 through 9, 1 through 12, 5 blank bubbles, A through Z, a blank bubble, A through Z, male, female, true, false, and so forth. So you can always select one of these just to see what you get, and let's say select blank A through Z. I get a blank bubble at the top and then A through Z. So if you were making a name field of some kind, you could select that. But let's go and look at something else that's very interesting, and let's talk about 5 blank bubbles. Okay. When I say 5 blank bubbles, and I'm going to make it horizontal so that my 5 blank bubbles are across the screen, because this is a horizontal field, I can modify the number of rows by just dragging the handle just like a box. Okay. If I go to the right handle and I drag that, nothing happens. Why is that? Well, if I want to add characters or bubbles to the right, I have to add characters up here. Now, you're looking at this and thinking, what the heck is that? It doesn't look like there's anything there. If I put in 0 through 9, there's something there. Well, blank bubbles are represented by a different character on your keyboard. When you first create this field, it says 5 blank bubbles, but if I click off in the workspace and click back, it doesn't look like there's much there, but what is actually there are 5 underscore characters. There is no character on your keyboard that says blank bubble, so we had to put it somewhere where you could create a blank bubble. So if I want to add more blank bubbles to the right of this, I just add more underscore characters, and that is the key, the uppercase of the key just to the left of the plus equals, in case you're not familiar with that underscore word. Hold down the shift key, press that key, and I get more bubbles to the right. Okay, so if it's a horizontal field, I can modify the number of rows by just dragging, but to add number of columns, I have to add characters. Okay, this is a little easier to see, and I'm going to go back to a 0 through 9, and I'm going to make it horizontal. This is often the way you use a 0 through 9 field in the horizontal direction. So because this is a vertical field, I can add more columns by dragging this. But if I wanted to add more characters down here, if I drag that, if I drag this, nothing happens. I would have to add characters here. So if I wanted to add ABC, I just type in ABC. Okay, so once again, you can type anything you want, and let's just do that. Let's type Tyuionb. I got bubbles with Tyoiionb. So you can type anything here, but you can also select one of these. Okay, so blank bubbles, once again, something very important to remember is that blank bubbles, and I'm going to select 5 blank bubbles with spaces this time, and let's make it horizontal. What we have here, click off, click back on, is an underscore character and then an actual blank. So if you want to add blanks in between, so if I wanted to add more bubbles out here, space bar, underscore, space bar, underscore, and I get more out there. But once again, because it's a horizontal field, and I can see that here, I can drag more rows. So the next question is very obvious. What if I want a blank row in between these rows? That's what this property right here, row and column gap. In this case, because it's a horizontal field, it's a row gap. If I change this to 2, select it, click 2, then I get a blank row, and I can make more of those by just dragging down. Okay, so that's how you manipulate bubble fields, and because that's something you have to do a lot, I wanted to mention that very specifically, how you modify bubble fields. So I'm going to, once again, this field is selected. I'm going to click our big red X here, and it's going to delete it. So let's talk about how to modify an actual question. Okay, let's go down here, and let's say, and I've actually got some space down here, so I'm going to grab this and just drag it down once. Notice that whenever you drag a bubble field, it will stay on this grid. That's very much on purpose. The grid helps you align things to bubble fields, and it keeps the bubbles spaced evenly and correctly. So I've moved that down. Oh, didn't get that, so let's drag that down a full space. Let's say we wanted to add some colors down here. How would I do that? Okay, so let's unlink this. Notice that I have 4 separate bubble fields. Okay, so let's say I wanted to add 4 colors down here. I would modify each of the bubble fields and then add a label. Okay, so I'm going to click on this bubble field, and I'm going to just, because once again, look up here, it's vertical. If I drag down, I want another bubble, but if I drag down, nothing happens because it's a vertical field. I have to add another underscore to get another bubble. Okay, and I'm going to do that to all of them. Click each one, add 4 bubbles. Well, let's just add 3, just to show you that it doesn't have to be equal. You can leave this as 2. And then let's add some colors. Now, I can click on my text tool, and I can add another text field here, but let me show you a very handy trick. If you select a field, put your cursor over that field, hold down the Control key and left click and drag, you will get an exact copy of that object or objects. Okay, so I now have 2 Concords. It's exactly the same as the one above it, which is what I want, except for the name. So all I have to do is add a name here. and let's go back and let's add black back in. Whoops. Make it lowercase. So I can do the same thing here. I can put my cursor over the object, hold down the control key, left click my mouse, and drag an exact copy. And I get another copy of that. And it matches all the other labels. So now I could make this. Do we have purple in here? I don't think we have purple in here. And then I can grab any one of these and do the same thing. So let's grab orange, control, left click and drag. We call this control copy, and this works in other software as well. It does work in Word. So let's just change, and I can also always go, I'm changing things up here on the object bar, but if I click on properties, I can also change it up here. So, or down here, excuse me. So let's pick another color. Oh, what's a good color? Let's just say light green, just for the heck of it. Click OK, and it puts in that. So now I've added 3 colors to my question, and I want to link it back. And when I select all of this and link it, then I can go down here and look and see that what happened, magenta, Concord, now black, then red, blue, and if I scroll down, purple, then green, yellow, light green, then orange and cyan, and my question text here. Okay, click OK. Let's go back here for just a second. These properties up here, the Scanfield Properties, these are things that affect how this field will be scanned, and they will be discussed in a future video, in one of the next videos in creating the scan template. Okay, so we'll talk about those properties later. Just wanted to mention that. So that's how you modify an existing field, and so that is a very handy thing to know, to add bubble fields and response fields. Okay. Now let's go to the second page, because the last thing I want to discuss in this video is down here at the bottom, and this was discussed in the first video once, but I want to discuss it again because it's important. By the way, if you wanted to add more text fields down here, let's just repeat. Use our control copy. Let's say I wanted to add something else down here. I can hold down the control key, left click and drag, make an exact copy, and then I could modify this field. I could add some other text that I wanted. Okay, so that's an easy way to add the fields down there. And once again, remember that you can move anything around. If I just didn't like the spacing here, I'm going to left click and drag a box over. I've selected all of these things now, and I just want to move them down a little bit. And then let's move this down a little bit more, just to add a little more white space. By the way, something I haven't mentioned about bubble fields, this gray crosshatch area around each bubble field is a stay out of area. You should never put anything inside this area except possibly some very light shading. And I'm going to unlink this, talk about this situation for just a minute. This shading, if you click on it, notice that it's 10% blue. Watch what happens when I try to change it to 35% blue. I get a warning. Shade objects touching response objects should not have colors greater than 10%. The reason is very simple. This is so dark that it could interfere with the scanning of these bubbles because it's dark. And what the software is looking for is dark marks, so it could interfere. It could feel like one of these bubbles is marked even when it's not. And so we give you this warning about 10%. Sometimes you even have to go back as far as 5%, because if your printer is printing very darkly, 10% can even be bad, especially if you're going to be copying your forms using a copier. Copiers tend to make this shading very dark. Sometimes it's better not even to run the shade over the object, the response object, and therefore you can do something like this. Just stop it at the edge. So it still helps the person see which question goes with which group of bubbles, but it doesn't run the shade over the area here. So I'm just going to extend this over and change it back so that everything's consistent. But that's just a little bit about shading and these shading objects and the gray crosshatch area. Oh, one more thing. So with the gray crosshatch area, you would never do this. You would never take a box and that's a green box, but it doesn't matter what color it is, and put it this close to the bubbles. Okay, you're inside the gray crosshatch area. If you wanted a box around this, it's best to put it on the edge of the gray crosshatch area, and I'm expanding the box in 2 directions. And what we've learned, the more white space you leave around the bubbles, the better the form will scan. So what we've learned to do is, instead of leaving a thin box with a dark color, we'll make it a thick line 4, and then we'll change the color, and I'm going to make it blue. We'll change the color to something like 10% blue, so that we can, as humans, can still see this box. But when you scan this form, this box and this shading will drop out and leave the maximum amount of white space around your bubbles. Okay, that always helps scanning. So that's another way to do things. I'm just going to delete this box with our big red X. Reselect these, left click and drag the box over, and then link it together. And everything linked correctly. Okay, let's talk about one last thing before we end this video. I want to talk about this box here. One more little feature I want to talk about. I'm trying to select this blue box, and it's not selecting very well because I have other objects in the area. A trick is, if you have a number of objects in the area, if I right click on that area, it will show me the objects that are in the area, and I can select the one I want. I have a line blue, I have a box blue, and I have a image clip blue, and that's the one I'm trying to select. So I can move it out of the way, left click and drag it out of the way. So what actually drew this area on the form is the box and the lines and the text. Okay, what this blue box is, and it's not blue because the form is blue, it's blue, it will always be blue no matter what color your form is. With the diagonal lines, this shows an image region. Image region is a feature of the Remark Office software that can take this area of the form, separate it from the full image, put it in a separate little file, and there is a report that will allow you to gather those little files together onto a single report, so that you can then create, say, a PDF or print the report, send it to whoever needs to read the comments, and so they don't have to have the physical forms in their possession to read the comments. That's the purpose of an image region, and that's what this blue box with the angles across it are. Okay, that will be discussed in more detail in one of the next 2 videos as well. So that is pretty much how you modify a form in the Full Forms Designer after you've created it in the Easy Form Design Wizard, or you can create a form absolutely from scratch. If you just click on File and New and Form instead of using the Easy Form Design Wizard, you can say no when this pops up. You can change any of the form properties here, whether it's a letter, you could make it U.S. legal. When I click OK, it brings me up a blank screen. I could just start clicking on tools and drawing my form. So that's another way to create a new form, but not the easiest way. That's why we have the Easy Form Design Wizard, because it'll do a lot of the work for you. So that is the end of today's video, which was Concord Forms Designer modifying a form created in the Easy Form Wizard. The next video in the series is using the Concord Suite series is Concord Forms Designer, creating a scan template to scan your form in the Remark Office OMR software. Thank you for watching.